We'll be recording our session today, so we'll ask you to go ahead and mute and shut off your video just to increase the bandwidth. If you have questions, please feel free to put those in our comment section in the chat box. And Katie and Larry will be on later to answer some of your questions as we go along through the presentation. We'd like to welcome today Katie Bell, local food system and small farms extension educator for the University of Illinois Extension. Katie serves Franklin, Jackson, Perry, Randolph, and Williamson counties in the southern part of the state. She has a background in agribusiness economics. She markets premium. She works with markets for premiums to get for your organic produce, and currently conducts research on specialty crops, including asparagus, tomatoes, and peppers. Katie provides educational programming to specialty growers, youth, and others involved in the local food system. Welcome, Katie Bell, today for our greenhouse in the backyard. So everybody that's excited about growing here in their backyard and they might be wanting to start a project. So we appreciate you joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me, Chris. And I'm going to go ahead and shut my camera off, and then I'll turn it back on for questions. So I think we'll just go ahead and jump right in talking about backyard greenhouses. And then if you want to, for fun, you can just throw in the chat, what's your dream backyard greenhouse look like? And then also, if you had this greenhouse here, maybe what would you grow in it? So when we're looking at backyard greenhouses, I'm going to do an overview, talk about the basics, and then like Chris said, any questions that you have, feel free to put in the chat box or anything that you want me to talk about more, and I'm happy to cover that. So again, as Chris said, my name is Katie Bell, and I'm an extension educator serving local food systems and small farms. So the first thing that I wanted to get into is covering a little bit of terminology that I'll be using today. That way, we are all on the same page, because I know some of these terms can be kind of regional and then also kind of industry related. So that way everybody knows what I'm talking about, at least for this presentation. So our first one is, whenever we talk about protected culture, that's using any kind of structure that's designed to alter the growing environment. So that can be as simple as some of the low tunnels that we'll discuss, just covering plants outside, or as complicated as a very large scale heated greenhouse. And so that protected culture just refers to the general idea of altering the growing environment by using a structure. A greenhouse, in general terms and kind of industry terms, we're talking about a glass or a polycarbonate structure that typically uses active heat, which we'll discuss a little bit more, but that's an artificial heat source. So whether that's wood or propane or maybe electric heat. And we also think of greenhouses as being much more sealed and closed in structure than some of our high tunnels. So a cold frame structure is generally a smaller structure than a greenhouse that only uses the sun as a heat source, as opposed to maybe propane or electric heat. So cold frames are generally considered to be a little more simplistic in design as well as heating system. A high tunnel, which I'll use that term quite a bit, is a plastic covered structure. It's similar to a greenhouse, but typically only uses captured solar energy to heat it. So again, using the sun as a heat source. Some high tunnels, though, are designed more like a greenhouse in the fact that they have stationary sides and they can be heated with an active heat source. So low tunnels are smaller plastic covered structures. Typically, we see low tunnels over plants grown outside that we're trying to get started a little bit earlier, or maybe even a low tunnel system if we were expecting some kind of a late frost like we did last year and we covered things. Or you could use a clear plastic to cover them. But low tunnels are usually, not permanent at all, whereas something like a greenhouse is going to be a more permanent structure. Whenever I say passive heat, that means that we're using heat capture to provide the heat. So we're using heat captured from the sun, both the first go round, so as it comes into our structure, but then also we can use water or other heat holding materials like gravel or concrete to sort of hold and preserve our heat source. So whenever you think about the sun shining on the pavement all day and how much heat that holds and then releases at night whenever you walk across it. And so that's what we're talking about whenever we say passive heat. Active heating is whenever we use an artificial heat source, like propane wood or electric heat, to circle heat through our system. So you're going to see active heat most commonly in a greenhouse. So I've just got a short video here. It's a little bit of a tour of our high tunnel here at the Murfreesboro office. So that was just a little tour of our high tunnel here at Jackson County. And that one is a 20 by 48, and it has 4 wooden raised beds inside of it. And we generally keep that in production almost every month of the year with something. So what makes a greenhouse a greenhouse? And more talking about like the almost the greenhouse effect. What are we trying to do with a greenhouse? I mean, we're trying to provide heat and capture heat. So whether that's an active heating system or a passive heating system, we're trying to get extra light capture and really, maximize the light that we have, especially in our transitional seasons. So our spring and our fall weather, we're really trying to make use of some of our lower light and shorter days by capturing that light and making as much use of it as possible. These systems also provide a more humid environment. Plants need the moisture to be able to grow. And then we also have a much more controlled environment in a greenhouse or a high tunnel or any of these protected culture structures. We're much more easily able to keep things like weeds, insects, diseases from coming in the first place. We can still very much see problems in greenhouses with insects and diseases and even pests. But if we do a really good job of being preventative, we do have a lot more control than we do, say, out in the field, because we can control the temperature and widen our growing season so much more. And then also because so this in this greenhouse here, it's very much like a room. It's mostly sealed, so we're going to have a much less risk of things blowing in on the wind or animals being able to get into this structure. So systems can be as complicated or as simple as you want. So there's a lot of freedom for creativity, and then also it can be, these structures can be very budget friendly depending on how much of it you're willing to do yourself, and kind of to be able to utilize what you have available to you. And so I just wanted to show, kind of one into the other. So this is a simple this is just a cell tray with, I think these are Brussels sprouts. And then these are just the domes that we put on top of them. So, that's in a way, in the most very, simple terms, this is protected culture. This is using the same concept that our larger scale greenhouses are. So this is a greenhouse. This system has a um, propane heat source, and then also in the summertime it has a thermostat and it vents at, I want to say, somewhere around 75 or 80, that the vents will kick on and there's fans that pull cool air through. At a certain point during the year, because there's only so much venting that can be done, this greenhouse, everything will come out of here, and they'll close it up because it just gets too hot. And they don't have a shade cloth to put on this. So I just wanted to show this as an example, and kind of get you thinking about, why would we use greenhouses? Why do we use protected culture if it's all this extra building and then maintenance that goes into it? So these pictures I planted, this is arugula, and I seeded it the same day, and it pretty much has gotten the exact same treatment. The photos to the left of each comparison are done in a small backyard greenhouse setup, which I have a picture of that I'll show a little bit later on. And then the picture on the right were seeded outside in the exact same raised bed. So it's two raised beds right next to each other. One had a structure over it. The other one was just open to the elements. And so as you can see, there's a difference in height here. And then also, so I took this picture this morning, and so this arugula is about, at its tallest point, maybe 6.5, 7 inches tall. And this seeded the same day is 2.5 inches tall. And so the same thing with the red lettuce down here. It was seeded the exact same day. This one's inside the structure. This one's planted in the raised bed outside. And you can just see the difference and how much of a boost you can get from using even something as basic as the structure that you'll see, to be able to boost. So it does not have to be complicated at all, or terribly expensive. So some things to consider whenever we're trying to decide what kind of structure we're going to build, and how we're going to do it. So I want you to think about, what is your goal? What are you trying to grow? Are you just trying to grow enough food for your family, so that way you have, some good variety, seasonal, try to get some season extension, get a jump start for your garden? Or are you, trying to add this to maybe a small, backyard business where you're looking for something that's a little more complicated and, gives you a little bit wider range? Also, how permanent do you want this structure to be? Because some of, something like a greenhouse with a concrete pad or even gravel, that's pretty permanent. And once you put it up, there's going to be some costs incurred if you ever want it taken down. Whereas something like these really simple, easy greenhouses or high tunnel structures can be much simpler to take down. And it's something even that you could put up and take down in a season, or the low tunnels, those can be up for a few days and then taken down and stored and reused over and over again. So just think about, permanence and what kind of space you have to be able to keep a structure in that area. And then also the location, what kind of area are you working with? How big is your backyard? Do you have several acres? And that's going to determine, what kind of structure you can have. Do you have the room? Are you able, if you're going to build a larger structure, maybe something that's 20 by 30 feet, or even, 10 by 15 feet, are you going to have room to be able to get, the equipment back to your location? Even if it is a fairly small greenhouse, are you going to be able to, back a pickup truck back there with your lumber and your siding and things? So just thinking about your location. And then also, are there large trees around? Are there large structures, things that are going to have shading problems? And then your budget, you can have some of these simple structures for $100, and then you can, with an unlimited budget, you can have a really fancy, large greenhouse or high tunnel, lots of automation. So it really just depends. These can kind of be as cheap or as expensive as you want them to be. But we'll kind of talk about some middle of the road options and things as well. And then materials. Are you planning on ordering from a company, ordering a kit from a company? Are you planning on, doing it yourself, using salvage materials? What materials are you working with? That's also going to affect your budget, affect the lifespan of your greenhouse or high tunnel. If you're planning to build a more permanent structure that's going to be there for several years and be there through all of the seasons, you're going to want to think about your snow load, and what, especially if you're ordering a tunnel or a greenhouse from a company, what kind of snow load is that tunnel rated for? There are lots of different bow and truss systems that I'll talk about, for being able to withstand snow. And then also, do you have a plan to remove snow? If you have a structure that's actively heated, so if you're using heat in your tunnel, you're going to have less of a snow problem unless we get a lot of it, because it'll melt as it hits the top of the tunnel. But in a cold frame structure like this, in a high tunnel, whenever there's snow on it, that does a couple of things. That puts a lot of stress and strain on the actual structure of the tunnel. It can stretch out your plastic. If it stays long enough, or if your tunnel's weak, snow's heavy enough, it can cause tunnel collapse. And then, that can be, in most cases, unless it's just in a small area, that's pretty much the end of it for your tunnel, because a lot of these bows are going to be twisted, and it just puts wear and tear on your tunnel. Another thing to think about is, once you get a certain amount of snow on top of your greenhouse or tunnel, it acts as an insulator, as a blanket. And then even if it warms up outside with that snow on top, it's going to be pretty cool inside of your tunnel, because the light can't get through, and snow is a really good insulator. And then also, the climate in your location. Even here in Illinois, we run several different hardiness zones through here. A low, a 4 to, at the very, very bottom of the state, a 7 for the hardiness zones, as far as what our low temperatures are. So we kind of run the gamut here in Illinois. And so thinking about climate and where you're located is also going to, maybe influence what structure you might choose, what system you might use, and in a combination even. So once you've kind of considered those things, and we're talking about building a structure, and this is, pretty much across the board, any structure, any size, except for maybe the extremely temporary stuff like your low tunnels. But even then, we want to be conscious of the contour and the slope of the ground. So for site selection, we're going to look, our tunnel, we want the length or the longest part of your structure to follow the contour of the ground. So if you have a slope, you want to follow that slope, so that way you don't have ponding or drainage issues with inside your tunnel. Generally, in a perfect world, we would like a 0.5% to 1% slope gradient from one end of the tunnel to the other. And that just helps with water moving through our tunnel, because as we water our plants, especially for things on the ground, but even in a structure where you're using benches, you want your ground to be fairly level. If you're looking at a new site, you want to be aware of erosion and ponding issues that may already exist in the area. So if you're you're in a low spot, you might have to do some extra things to build that ground up or to level it off, to make sure that you're not experiencing, giving yourself problems before you've even gotten your structure built. Ideally, if you can be on a south-facing slope to kind of maximize the heat and the sun, in a perfect world, that'd be great. And then you also kind of want to pay attention to your prevailing winds, because if you'd like to use your high tunnel throughout the year, these prevailing winds can be really important for cooling the tunnel, and you can put vents in, so that way you're maximizing capturing that wind and having a cooling effect in the summers. Water and electricity, depending on if you plan to have heat or lights or running even ventilation fans in the tunnel. Electricity might be something that you're interested in, and definitely something to be aware of. And then also water, because even if you don't need electric in your tunnel, you're most likely going to need water or be near a water source, so that way you're not carrying water from a long distance. Not to say that it can't be done, but if you can be near a water source, that would be ideal. And then also, as you're planning and making plans for your greenhouse or your high tunnel, note where the sun and the shade are at several times throughout the year, because in the summertime, as we get longer days, shadows are going to stretch, and we're just going to have a lot longer days, as well as in the wintertime, we're going to have our shorter days. And so as we think about where the shadows are, certain times of the year, we're going to get more shade from a structure or a tree line than we would in other times of the year. And so taking note of that throughout the year, and then also the position of the sun in the sky, depending on the time of year, that's really going to depend on where you put your structure, especially if there are other structures around that you may want to take consideration in. So now that we've kind of decided the site that we're going to put it in, and done all of the necessary things to start our foundation, what kind of materials are we going to be using for the structure? Are you going to build it out of wood or metal, even PVC pipe for some of your smaller, lower tech tunnels and low tunnels? That can be an option, and be more wood. So metal or PVC, depending on the structure, they can be lighter to work with. They probably going to last a lot longer than wood. Up until recently, wood was a fair bit cheaper. So, that might have been a better way to go. Or if you're, upcycling wood from pallets or something, that's also something to consider. So kind of specifically talking about a high tunnel or a low tunnel, we're going to be using a heavy plastic sheeting, usually the 6 mil plastic. Whenever you look on websites, that's going to be about what you want for your end walls and your cover on your high tunnel. Plastic will degrade over time from the UV rays, wind damage, rips that occur throughout the year, as well as it does tend to stretch as it breaks down. Stress of the wind, maybe it wasn't properly put on. And so all of that is natural and that occurs. And so you will need to replace that every so often. And I'll talk about that as well. But so this is our 6 mil plastic that we have on our tunnel, and it's held on with wiggle wire, which is this kind of, it has a curl to it or curve to it that you fit into this channel and kind of wiggle it in there to make it fit. And that works really well. And it's really nice for whenever we have to replace this plastic again, we can just take the wire out of the channel, put up new plastic, and then put the wire back in the channel. And so that is really nice. The corrugated plastic or the polycarbonate panels, this is more thinking about your greenhouse structures, but it's going to be pretty durable, and less likely to shatter like glass might. It's going to be lighter to work with than glass panes. And the corrugated plastic is like what you would think of for a tin roof, but it'd be the plastic, and typically clear plastic or semi clear. And then the polycarbonate panels, those are nice because they have this double wall, so they have an air pocket in them, and air is what actually holds the heat. So whenever we're talking about insulating or trying to keep heat longer, we're actually wanting to heat up the air. And so these double walls can be really nice for that. Corrugated plastic polycarbonate, those they do also have a lifespan, 5-6 years that they're going to, the UV is going to break those down as well. They tend to get brittle. And then they also just lose some of their clearness as well. And so those do need replaced. But with all of that, it's routine maintenance that you just plan for to have these structures. So as I'd said before, if you're thinking about building a high tunnel, you might want to consider putting in the wiggle wire channel. That it can be a little bit expensive up front, but once you have those channels, you don't have to replace those channels. You just replace the plastic. Because before, in place of these channels, we had the staple strips, the batten strips, and we had to take all of that off. And we found that the wiggle wire channel is much easier and less wasteful. And then if you're thinking about adding any ventilation curtains, those can be other considerations to take in a curtain system. And then any automation that you might want to have, whether it's automatic vents or any automatic watering systems, things like that. Automatic cooling systems can also be something to think about. And that's whenever we start adding automation or some of our fancier curtain systems, that's where we start getting a little more expensive whenever we start adding on bells and whistles that way. So types of greenhouses, and this is kind of specifically referring to, I should say, greenhouses or high tunnels in the architecture of the frame. Your typical A frame, which is so named because it's shaped like an A. Those are going to be typically a little bit smaller in structure. The most common that you see for these larger production high tunnels are going to be either the Gothic, which is this kind of teardrop shape here. So you can see that it has a pointed top and then it kind of bows out this way. And then you have your hoop or your rounded tops, and then you also have a rounded top with a point as well. But I did want to spend a little bit of time talking about the differences in these tunnels here. So whenever I had mentioned snow load earlier, as well as being able to handle the wind. This tunnel here, this is a tunnel from Dixon Springs. It does not have any of this W trussing here. So these V trusses in the top right-hand picture, you can see there's a lot more metal trussing there. And all of that offers a lot of support for either high wind events, but also that snow load because it can more evenly distribute that weight. And then also we focused here on the bow width or these ribs here in any of these pictures that I'm kind of down in the bottom left picture. If you're worried about snow load, another thing you can do to strengthen your tunnel, which this does get a bit more expensive because you're adding more material, but you can set your bows closer together. And that will also help. And so this tunnel does not have any sort of, the one here on the bottom left, does not have any sort of trussing system. It's just the bows and then these purlins here that run parallel along the top. And so this tunnel in the wintertime, it's in a lot more danger of collapse because it doesn't have nearly the internal structure that the one in the top right has. And then also over time, it has gotten kind of warped along the top because whenever you're up above this tunnel and you look down it, you can see that it dips and curves. And that's just because it's a weaker structure. And so that's definitely something to look into and take into consideration, especially if you're building a tunnel as big as this one. And I think this one is either 30 or 35 by 90. So it's a good sized tunnel. So this is another just kind of a good idea for if you're building something more along the lines of an actual more greenhouse structure, more permanent structure, less ventilation, that you might start seeds in early in the year or use as a workroom, with the corrugated plastic and then tin along the bottom. This structure, and the PowerPoint will send out at a later date, but I've included this as a link to the full schematics in this article. And I just thought it was a really great example and presentation of something that would fit well in a backyard, and gives you some good dimensions here on the size of this structure. So this one here on the left is the of the greenhouse that I had, that I grew the arugula in, and this is a picture I took before the seeds came up. But you can see that it's in a raised bed here, and then I have anchored it down. There's these anchor stakes that came as well. And I'm really glad that I anchored it as well as I did, because with the winds that we've had, I noticed the anchors are starting to pull out. So I'll need to re-drive those anchors, but that is something to consider as these smaller structures. On a day that it's not windy, you don't think it's, any big deal, but with the winds that we've been having, if I didn't have this anchored down, it would flip over and be gone. And this structure here is a 4 by 6 by 6 feet tall. And I have it over a raised bed, but you could also set it right on the ground. And then there's room in here that you could put a small table or workbench, and it has worked out really well to boost the plants and help them. You saw just the jump start that they got. And this is another idea for a small backyard. Again, a more of a greenhouse structure, workroom type structure. And these are the project plans for it. And so some really good ideas to think about. So this is kind of just here running running the gamut, the full gamut of very, very low tech to again, a more extensive system. This one here in the top left hand is actually agribon or row cover fabric, but the concept would be basically the same, is that we have a support wire here, support string, and then 2 stakes, and then this cover just pulls over. You could also do this with plastic. This system here is another way that you can really maximize and get your bang for your buck on your high tunnel system, because even if you have a passive heating system and you're not using any active heat, we're getting sun capture, and then we're also putting this row cover over, and then they also have black plastic down. So the black plastic is catching, and holding heat, and then the row cover is capturing that heat as it comes off at night and holding that around. And most of the time, barring any extreme weather like what we had this winter where it got so cold, you only need a few degrees above freezing, just especially on these cool season crops. So this is spinach and then kale in the back. And if you can just get a few degrees and protect that from dying, it may not grow a whole lot, and they will slow way down in December and the beginning of January, just because of how little light we are getting. But if you can protect it even just a few degrees, you can keep them alive and growing throughout the winter, especially your colder hardy crops like spinach, kale, lettuces. Those can all do pretty well in a system like this. Moving over to the top right picture, we again have this tunnel, and a couple of things to note here. These 2 big fans up at the very front are ventilation fans that are on a thermostat, and it's usually about 80 that the thermostat kicks on and pulls cool air through to try to hold that around 80. This one is a high tunnel, but it's set up, these sides do not roll down or roll up to allow it to vent. So it can get quite hot in this tunnel. On the bottom right, this structure here is just cattle panels and T-posts driven into the ground. And what you could do with a structure like this to turn it into a makeshift greenhouse or high tunnel is to put the heavy gauge, the 6 mil plastic over it and secure that, and then you would have a high tunnel system. Right now we're working on turning it into a trellis for gourds, so we have a raised bed system set up, and the cardboard is down for a weed suppression. And then on the bottom left is again our Jackson County high tunnel, and these are the side walls of the curtains that are dropped down about halfway. And I actually took that picture this morning. So building considerations, whenever we've kind of picked out what we wanted, some things to really keep in mind. As I mentioned before, wind is going to be really something that we want to think about, because as these structures get bigger, it gets more expensive if they get damaged. It can be dangerous because if a fairly large structure blows over, part of it blows off, we could have damage to other people's property. So we want to make sure that our structures are properly anchored. Even some of your smaller backyard greenhouse structures, even like the corrugated plastic and tin structure, you're going to want to make sure that that's really well anchored into the ground. All of the bigger high tunnels that I've been showing you, those are all of the bows, all of the side bows, they're anchored into concrete to keep them from blowing away. And so you want to make sure everything's really well anchored. So high winds can rip plastic, damage the frame, so that wind and stress on the frame can cause damage. And then again, so flipping smaller improperly anchored structures, because even though it's small, the wind's going to catch it and blow it away or knock it over. So definitely making sure that you're following, the schematics and things, and properly anchoring your tunnel is not someplace that you want to cut corners. So you want to make sure that that thing is not going anywhere, unless you want it to be semi-permanent. And even in that case, you want to use the appropriate anchor systems. Snow, as I'd said before, making sure that our bow spacing, so those ribs and the trussing formation, those play a key role in the strength of the tunnel to be able to hold up to snow until you can get it removed. Again, shade is another consideration. Be conscious of trees and structures that may cause shadows. And like I said, go out and check several times throughout the year and kind of make notes of where things are landing and the shadows are landing. And because once you put your structure up and then you realize, oh, hey, that little tree that we had near the tunnel that really wasn't a problem, well, 5 or 10 years down the road, it's grown up and now it's a shade issue. That's always something to think about. So even smaller trees that will grow, good things to keep in mind. Rain, even small structures interrupt the rainfall and shed water in kind of an unnatural pattern. And they can cause ponding issues or backflow flooding issues, so running into your structure and flooding the floor without proper drains or gutters. Some of these drain systems can be pretty expensive, and especially for a small backyard project, you're not going to want to get into all that necessarily, but you might want to just take it into consideration and either build up the inside of your tunnel a little bit, so that way you have so that way the water doesn't naturally want to run inside of your tunnel, or using raised beds. So just being aware of where that water is going to go. The slope that you've put it on again comes into play, because we want that water to run off of our structure and then move away. We don't want it to stick around. So these are some of the crank systems on the curtains. This is a hand crank system that raises and lowers those curtains like you saw in the video. And then this system, it's a little bit hard to see, but this is the picture on the right here. This is a loop that you can put either a hook on a hand crank in and crank this curtain. This one is a roll up curtain. The picture on the left is a drop down. But this roll up is a gearbox here, and they actually figured out how to put a hook into a drill, and they can actually use the drill to drive this gear up and down so that it's not so much cranking, because this is on a long 90-foot tunnel, and so trying to hand crank that, it can be done, but from this gearbox it's can be difficult and a little bit dangerous if it gets out of control. So care and maintenance, how do we get the most out of our high tunnels, our structures that we've built them, we've invested time and money into creating them? How do we get the most out of them? We want to replace our plastic, as we've kind of talked about, every 3 to 5 years, again, because of the damage that just naturally occurs. If you've had any sort of large wind event or the plastic has ripped, you want to make sure, if the cover or the top part of the tunnel has ripped off, you want to make sure that you get that off as soon as possible, because once it gets up in the air, acts like a parachute. Or if you've ever tried to walk with an umbrella in a windstorm, it puts a lot of pressure on your structure. So you want to go ahead and try to get, as soon as it's safe, try to get that plastic off if it has ripped majorly and is whipping around, because you don't want it to do any more damage or put any strain on your tunnel. And then also just be conscious when you're mowing. One of the most common ways that our tunnel gets little holes in the top of it is, mowing up rocks and throwing them at the tunnel. We also have these larger grasses, and we're always very conscious whenever we burn the grasses that the wind is blowing away from our high tunnel, because we don't want any hot sparks or ashes to blow in and land on the plastic and melt it. So just some things to be careful of, to make sure that you're not replacing that plastic any sooner than you absolutely have to. Wood may need to be replaced or repaired. So you use wood in your high tunnels along the baseboards, or what we call the hip boards. So at that shoulder or head level part of the structure, you can use metal or wood. Wood may need to be replaced or repaired again every 5-6 years, depending on how it's treated. We typically recommend against, especially with the actual beds, from using any kind of chemically treated lumber, just because of what might leach into your beds and negatively affect the plants, or it may not be food safe. And so just something to keep in mind. So as I had said before, it's really important to, especially with the high tunnel structures, but your greenhouses as well, if you know that we're going to be getting a high wind event or a strong storm, you want to close the curtains and doors on your tunnels, because for one, this helps to prevent weed seeds, insects, fungal spores from blowing in and creating a problem that you may not have. And then also the wind pressure on tunnels that are open can cause extensive damage, again, to the frame, can put a lot of lift on the ceiling of your tunnel and cause you problems. So if you can, and you know that there's going to be an event coming, you want to go ahead and roll those curtains up and close everything. Remove snow from your structures, again, like I said, as soon as you can, as soon as it's safe. And you want to do that. We usually use a wide push broom, and we tap along the inside of the tunnel. And it's important to remove snow evenly, because if things are off balance, you can pull the tunnel down or cause warping. And then also you want to be very gentle with your plastic so that you're not accidentally punching through and causing rips or tears. Within the tunnel, to prevent disease issues from happening, especially if you are starting new plants, but in general, it's a good idea to go through and sanitize any pots that you might be recycling. So you want to clean them really good, get all the dirt and debris off, and then soak those in a bleach or commercial sanitizer mix to kill any pathogens. And then also wipe down your benches and all of your tools. Controlling weeds and diseases to keep them out. So for one thing, insect netting along the sides can help, again, with things from blowing in or coming into your tunnel. Just using good cultural practices. So don't bring in plants from, that look sickly or have insect problems. Don't bring those into your tunnel. Or if you are bringing them in and you're not sure where they've come from or if they might have problems, let them sit outside a few days away from your tunnel before you bring them in, just to help manage pests and diseases from causing a problem. Another thing you can do whenever you're building your structure is to use something like weed mat down before you put down any gravel or anything that you might be doing. Weed mat under your raised beds. You could also do cardboard, and that'll help prevent weeds from coming through the bottom if you can. Cardboard, and then if you're mulching or something like that, you could put the cardboard or weed mat down underneath of it, and that's going to delay weed pressure as well. And then another thing, when you're filling your beds, your raised beds, if you're putting raised beds inside of your tunnel or greenhouse, use good quality soil. Don't bring in problems that you don't have. And then if you are using any sort of pesticide, make sure that you're following all of the spray labels, and make sure that you're following the spray labels as they're labeled for indoor use, because some things that are perfectly safe to spray outside, whenever you bring them into an area that's closed and there's not as much ventilation, you can have different residual effects. And so you want to make sure that if you're using any chemicals, that you're following the label accordingly. And so make sure that you take the time to plan and have proper, construction of your high tunnel greenhouse, whatever you might be building, because if you have proper construction, you can get started on the right foot, do your research, know in the area that you have a tunnel that's suited for the snow load, and things like that. So that way, and that you choose a good site. So that way you're not trying to retroactively fix problems that could have been prevented if you just had a good construction in the first place. So techniques to maximize the usage. High tunnels, because they can be high tunnels and greenhouses, they can be a little bit expensive. They're a permanent structure. They're taking up space. We want to try to use them as much as possible. So a double layer of plastic, and this is kind of specific to high tunnels, but if you're using, like we said, the polycarbonate with the double wall polycarbonate, because we're trying to heat the air and that's what's causing our insulation, we want to, a double layer of plastic can do that and just add one more layer, a little more heat capture. Though that doesn't work in every situation, and sometimes people note condensation issues and things like that we may see, and that also depends, kind of how far south we're going to, that double layer of plastic may or may not be effective. All of the tunnels that I have personally worked with have all been single layer, but it's a strategy that you can use. Shade cloths. So shade cloths allow us to keep things in our high tunnels throughout the summer, and especially in this location. So shade cloths do exactly what they sound like. This picture down here on the bottom right is our high tunnel with its shade cloth on. We usually put that on around Memorial Day weekend, and then we usually take it off around Labor Day weekend. And that's not a set in stone, but that is generally when we notice that the temperatures are staying hot enough that we need some extra shade protection. So the shade cloths are great because For one thing, they do block some of the light that comes through because, believe it or not, we can get too much light on our plants and cause what's happening down here in this left picture, which is sun scald or sunburn on plants. And that is physiological, which means that it's not a disease or an insect or anything. That's just sunburn. But we can prevent a certain amount of that by using a shade cloth or a shade material. There are several different companies that you can order these from. You want to choose somewhere between 30 to 50% sun blockage or sun interruption. Depending on what crops you're going, this one I believe is a 50%. And if you're in northern Illinois, you may want to go on the lower end, so maybe 30%, just depending. But down here we get enough sun and it gets hot enough. We really do need the 50%. This cloth also helps keeps our plants from drying out quite as fast in the summertime. So it's a great thing to allow you to grow into the summer. You can use so these are some ideas for passive heat and extra heat capture barrels. So the large, like 50-gallon plastic barrels, you want to make sure that they're food safe, so like maybe big like food oil, so vegetable oil barrels. You can fill those with water and seal them, and then as the sun strikes the water, it heats up, and then at night the water releases that heat, and that will give you a little bump of heat that you might need. And like I said, it just needs to be a few degrees above freezing to help keep everything going. Geothermal, so if we're getting really fancy, some of the systems I've seen have water tubing that runs under concrete pads and heats or cools depending on the time of year to help manage that system. Other cooling systems can be ventilation systems. This is the back part of that ventilation system that I was showing you. And as you can see, these shutters open and close. They're on a thermostat. And then cooling walls, there's lots of really interesting water cooling walls and things that I didn't have any good pictures, but they can be another thing that you can add. And it works basically the way that an air conditioner works, in that it runs water or has a damp system, and then air blows over it, and then it cools it. And you can also use gravel or concrete to have extra heat capture. So like I said earlier, that gravel, that concrete soaks up all that extra heat and then releases it more slowly at night when the sun is gone. So this is just a really good, some good resource links. These top two are different publications that kind of get into high tunnel production and different structure types. One is from University of Arkansas, and I think the other one's the University of Nebraska. And so they're both really good sites. And then this third link here, I will pull over. It's from Mississippi State, and they have a really wonderful list of high tunnel companies and companies that provide supplies for high tunnels. Some of the most common brands of high tunnels, and this is not an advertisement for them, this is just different ones that I have used. Farm Tech is one that we've used. We've also done Zimmerman's Welding. That our tunnel, the tunnel here at the Jackson County office, that's a Zimmerman tunnel. And then Steppy Greenhouse Manufacturing is also another one. But a lot of these have website links and information. And so this is a really great place to go to get a really comprehensive list of where you might be able to order these systems and give you a good idea. These two websites are for the USDA, talking about their different EQIP grants. So these, their high tunnel initiative to be able to extend extend growing seasons by using high tunnel structures. And so I would encourage you, if you're looking especially to build a high tunnel of any size, I would look into those grants. And these two links are to our local foods state team page. There's lots of great videos, some good high tunnel updates from the Dixon Springs high tunnels, and then also my local county page where we have a good video of us resiting our high tunnel. And then the hightunnels.org is a really great place to go for all things high tunnels and other great resources. So I think now is the time for questions, and then it would be you can either scan this QR code, or I will also drop this link into the chat here in a minute. But it would be really helpful just to let us know how we did, and just fill out our evaluation. So if anybody has any questions, or I can hand it over to Chris and Larry, and I'll stop sharing my screen, and we can move on to his part of the presentation.
Thank you, Katie. There's a couple things that's come in before Larry shows some of his greenhouse slides. But one of the things was Kim had said that in the high tunnel that we had, or the greenhouse we had earlier, that she would start mini seedlings for the cool season and warm season crops, so she has them ready when she wants them. So that's typically in the backyard. That's probably what they're really wanting to do with a lot of it, is to start those seedlings and get a jump start for the season. Do you recommend anything to start early? I mean, as far as good recommendations for anything that you would start to begin with as a beginner, maybe in your backyard?
Oh, okay. So as a beginner, and right now, things that we could start in a structure, cucumbers, any of your squashes. We're getting close to, if you were wanting to seed tomatoes, we're getting a little past that, but you could still start tomato seedlings inside, grow tomatoes from seeds. And then also peas would be good. And then a little bit earlier, so some of our more cool season stuff that you could also start in high tunnels and then give yourself a jump would be things like arugula, lettuce, kale, spinach, carrots. Carrots you want to start in the ground. You don't want to transplant carrots to outside because they're a root vegetable. Any of your root crops can be early season.
I'm sorry, Katie.
Oh no, go ahead.
Those that you recommend for Southern Illinois, Kim.
Southern Illinois, yes.
But probably even in Northern Illinois, they could start some of the cool season crops.
Oh yeah, and so right now in Northern Illinois, I would say you've still got plenty of time to start some of the cool season stuff. So lettuce, kale, spinach, like I said, and then if you're wanting to start stuff in the ground right now, carrots, beets, radishes, those things could go in the ground right now for cool season.
Great, thank you for those tips. Barbara Jackson had made a comment. My backyard greenhouse would be large enough to start and grow my favorite foods. And I have a large dining table for family and friends to eat. So that's a great one.
Yeah, I love that.
It's a lot on that. Okay, so if you will stop sharing just for a moment, and then we'll pull your information back up. And I'm going to go ahead and start sharing Larry's. Can you see his? Are you able to see the screen?
I can see just your open screen. So I see you hovering over the greenhouse PowerPoint.
Okay, so let me start one more again. Now it opened. Did it open for you?
It hasn't.
Yet. Try it one more. Okay, so I'm gonna share screen one more time. Let's see.
Oh, there we go. Perfect.
Are we there? Okay. Okay, so Larry Boyles is on, and he's a master gardener from Marion County, and he's one of the volunteers that helps me with some of the projects at our community garden and some of our other activities that are going on. So Larry, I'm going to turn it over to you. if you would
Sure.
like. And let me see if I can pull you up. I don't know if you want to go ahead
You
and share
you
your
go you go to
screen.
you go to screen through it for me, or do
Yeah, I can. I can for you.
okay, I'll tell you. Yeah. We can start with the first screen. Yeah. Yeah. My greenhouse is a little different. I mean, it's on I don't want to say poor man, but it's a fairly economical greenhouse that I built myself. First of all, I'm Larry Boyles, and I've been a master gardener, I guess, since 2014. And I live a couple 1 hour north of it's Katie, wasn't it, that gave the presentation?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's Salem, Illinois. And this particular greenhouse is wood construction, and it's attached to my garage. And why I attached it to my garage, I have everything that she's mentioned. I have a heat source, and we'll get into that a little later. But I originally built this greenhouse about somewhere around 15 years ago, and I used skylights, like pole barn skylights, which was a mistake, but that's what I had at the time. I mean, it provided light, and it would warm it up when the sun, but as soon as the sun went down, it cooled off a lot. So as you can see, it's wood frame. It's 2x4 construction, and I think you can do that on 24-inch centers. I see some of the ones below is less than 24, but and I did support it because I have those. I did upgrade it to the solar panels, which we'll talk about a little later. It's this particular greenhouse. I'm not wild about having things too permanent. It is permanent. It is bolted to my garage, but it is on skids. It does have a floor in it, an insulated floor, and it is on skids. So if I wanted to move it and restore my building to a garage, I could do that. But it's been there for a long time. Yeah, we can. Oh yeah, and here I have a potting bench outside, which I use a lot for everything, potting and doing several other things. That it's an elevated bench, and it's easily accessible to do other projects on. So yeah, you want to turn the next one, Chris? Okay, here's the inside of my greenhouse. First of all, it's 9 foot long, and it's 4 feet wide, and it's 7 feet tall. It does face the south, and I use a sunscreen in the wintertime. I evacuate or take most everything out of that. I basically use it for overwintering, as you can see, flowers, fiddle leaf figs, ferns, and I do start plants in there, but I don't do any growing of anything in there. But I like to propagate or start cuttings, different cuttings. Flowers are so expensive. I do some coleus. I do various flowers in there, but we turn that back, Chris.
I'm sorry, I hit it.
I'm sorry. Yeah. I use a screen, and I just use it's a dark screen. It's like a weed barrier screen over the top of that, because it does get extremely hot in the summertime. And as Katie mentioned, I use a 6 mil twin wall polycarbonate. That works really well, or I'm very pleased with it. I've had that on for about probably 5 years, and those are available at Menards. Mine's a 6 mil with an airspace in between, millimeter with an airspace in between it. I think you can get almost a 1/2 inch, but the smaller one, which works fine for me, is about $60, a 4x8 sheet panel. I'm guessing at today's prices, I'd have about $560 somewhere in that neighborhood in price. I did use treated lumber on the bottom because it has some contact with the ground. I know the university people don't. If I was doing it over, there's some moisture in there, and I've had to support my rafter system a little because of some rot. But after 18 years or so, I mean, it'd be easy for me to replace those. But I would probably replace them with with pressure treated lumber, which I understand today's probably, from my research, is not all that dangerous, but just a matter of opinion. Okay. As you can see there, I have geraniums, fiddle leaf figs, and basically I overwinter things in there, and I have a light up. We'll go next skid, next slide. Here's my pretty economical fan source, but it's an oscillating fan, 2 of them in there. And when the sun shines in the winter time, when we had that snow and that below zero weather, I did take the snow off the roof. I did, like she suggested. I mean, it would supported it, but no light was getting through. And it was about 80, 85 degrees in there. So you have to cool those down. I do have a window in it, but I don't have any automation for ventilation in this particular one. So you can see I have 2 fans there. Okay, next slide. Here's, I do have a fluorescent light for lighting. I use one, I think, cool white, one warm white for starting some seeds. They're not up very good. Today, they're looking really nice, but, and I can adjust that light up and down for light intensity. I understand it needs to be pretty close to do any good. So, okay, next slide. There's some cuttings that I made. Coleus plants to me are pretty expensive, and I start a lot of my flowers and coleus and things. They're pretty easy to start in that greenhouse for planting in the spring. So. Okay, there's my heat source. It's a wood stove. I have electricity in there, of course, and I have a wood stove, and even in the coldest weather, I have a fire of an evening. I usually fire at about 8 o'clock, and it sometimes gets down to about 50. So those panels keep the heat in pretty well. And basically it's a 1-bay garage that is insulated fairly well. So that's my heat source, and that's about all I have. I don't know if you have any questions or not. That it has worked very, very well for me since I put those polycarbonate panels on there. I mean, you could build your own out of wood or construction, or like Katie said, there's a lot of different ways to build them, but that's what I did, and it's worked for me very well. So I don't know if anybody has any questions, but I'd be happy to answer if they do.
Okay, thank you, Larry, for helping
Yeah.
us out. And I don't know if you
Yeah.
want to start your video, and Katie, and we'll just open it up to questions. If there's any questions, I have a couple in the chat box. I would want to put it out to both of you. Katie put her Qualtrics evaluation on there, but Richard asked, I used floating row cover over concrete reinforcing wire. The wires from political signs work great. I use highway cones over tomato plants, and they will grow 15 inches in a week. You have to remove the cones for a couple days to let the plants harden off. Otherwise, they will not stand and will be on the ground. So that's another option that you might have for using the floating row covers, is the concrete and reinforced wire. And then I was looking, I'm sorry, I think that's about it right now. Does anybody have any other questions for Katie or Larry about his system? Larry, on your heat with the wood, do you run your fans in the winter time with that also?
In the daytime when the sun's shining, that's the only time. When the sun's shining, it pretty much stays 80, 85 in there. When as soon as the sun goes down, I turn them off because I'm out there a lot, and I just, no automation. I have a timer there, and I have used a timer, but I basically turn them off manually.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions for Katie or anything that Larry did?
Oh, looks like one just came in.
One just came in. Okay. For disinfecting a greenhouse in spring, should the interior glass panels and floor surface be covered also?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would say, and I think she also sent me a picture of her greenhouse, and it's pretty small. I know I would say no, just because in some situations it isn't practical if they're larger to be able to disinfect them, so they don't. But I would say as long as you disinfect your tools, your table, any pots that you're recycling or reusing, clean all of that and then disinfect it, because if you don't knock the dirt off and you disinfect it, you're not really doing a lot of good. So make sure you clean everything and then disinfect it. And then also, just check for any, if you're bringing in plants, check for any kind of insects or diseases that you might be bringing in inadvertently. But yeah, I would say you don't have to do the floor surface or the glass panels, because those are not going to hold.
Would you do any of the panels maybe next to the plants that might have
That would be
splashed
touching?
or touching anything?
You definitely could, if you've got the ability to do that, you move them out of the way and wipe that down. That wouldn't hurt anything, because I know for some of the trellising systems, we'll spray those with a bleach solution to clean those. So yes, you definitely could. And if you're worried about it, there's definitely no reason you couldn't do that.
Okay, and I don't see any other questions. So again, can I stop share? Do you want to, do you have yours again? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I can share it again.
You want to share
I just
your
have
contact one more time with them in case they have any questions that they'd like to reach out to you?
There we go. Okay, yep. This is my email, and then also my phone number. And right now, that will probably go to one of our secretaries, and then they'll send me an email and let me know. But I will make sure that I get back to you.
Okay, well, thank you for your time today. Katie and Larry, thank you for sharing your greenhouse and how you use yours. We appreciate it, and we appreciate everybody's time today, learning a little bit more about your backyard greenhouse. We will be sending this recording, posting it onto our YouTube channel, but we will send you a link also, and that way you would have the information from the handouts and the link available. Again, thank you for your time today.